video, we are going to look at how to add a score and how to have that displayed on the screen. Also, we're going to cover a few other things. You probably noticed that the scene looks different. There's a background now, new enemy turret, and a new helicopter enemy. We're going to review those. The reason why I already added them is because this is a good example of how you repurpose functionality that you already made, but you're applying it to a new object. And that you'll see that's very similar to what we already did. So to keep the video nice and short and snappy, and that way I'm not droning on, and again, to also reinforce the fact that this is just repurposing what we've already looked at, I've already added them in, and then we'll do a proper review of those. Okay, so first up, score. To make the score work, you need two things. A, you need a variable that tracks the score. So the variable gets increased every time that something gets destroyed. So if a tank gets blown up, that new variable gets increased. Missile gets blown up, that new variable gets increased. Second, we need to have a text object display that variable. So that's what this is here. So let's start with making that first. You go to Game Object, 3D Object, yes 3D even though it's a 2D environment, and you choose 3D Text. Over here, I just want to point out a couple of things. The character size usually starts off at 1, but is incredibly blurry. So you're probably going to have to drop that down to like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, whatever looks good to you. And you're going to have to increase the font because the font defaults to 0. Second, since the camera is always moving, we want the score to move in sync. That way it looks like it's static. It looks like it's wherever, the lower left corner, upper left, dead center, wherever you want it. So what you do is once you've created that 3D text, you just drag and drop it onto the main camera, making it a child to this parent. So this parent is moving, and therefore the child will move. So that gets our text object on the screen. Now let's look at the coding. In the GameFlow script, and again, the GameFlow script is for just that purpose, to kind of collect all these kind of overarching functions. Here's the new variable I created. It must be static, that way it's accessible throughout the application. Public static int total score equals 0. Makes sense for it to be 0 because why would you start with a score? Then to make this, so making this static makes this accessible to the individual objects. So like if we go to our missile script, well, we already check to see if there's a collision. So it's the on trigger enter. We already checked to see if it's something that's going to make the missile blow up. So all we have to do is just add a new line of code. That new variable we just created, add to it. That easy. And then it's just rinse and repeat. The tank, same thing. We already have the routine that checks to see if a collision is occurring. We're checking to see if it's anything that would destroy the tank, and then we just add the number to it. And also make sure that you're doing the addition before the object gets destroyed. And then just rinse and repeat. Every time you make a new type of enemy object, you're just making sure that you have that line of code in there. Now, how do we make the object, the 3D text object, be aware of that value? Well, what we do is we don't actually have a script attached to that object. What we do is the GameFlow script, which again is attached to the camera, what we did, we also added this. We added a new game object, and it's the score object. So again, this is similar to what we've done before, like when we did the public transform, and then you could put a particle system or something like that onto it. So very similarly, here's our main camera, here's our script, and see, we have this new score object, and you just drag and drop and put it there. So if you're thinking, well, it's a child isn't aware of it, no, not in that sense. So you do have to do this. You do have to create the variable and link this to the script. Once you do that, you can just make changes to it. You can modify it. And so here in the start section, score object, so again, that's what we just created. get component renderer, sorting order 10. So sorting order is what 2D environments use in lieu of the z-axis. So whatever has the highest number for the sorting order value is on top, and everything else is behind it. So like for instance, if I click on this new background, which we'll review in a few minutes, its sorting order is -5. If I click on the foreground terrain, it's 0. 0 is bigger than -5, so 0 is above that. And our score text object there, because of the type of object, you don't see it as a top level. You can't change it in the inspector, so that's why we had to add this line of code that says make it 10. Well, 10 is bigger than 0 and is bigger than -5, and therefore it is on the front. So it's on top of everything else. So the GameFlow script, again, we added a score object. Well, I shouldn't say a score object. We made a variable, and then we created a game object to store the text object, and by combining them, it turns into a score. So this puts the score object on top, and then in the update section, we need to do this. Score object.getComponent text mesh text, and then this is saying take this literal text score with a colon and a space and concatenate with it, that is, add to it, append to it, that new variable. Now, the reason why I have to do toString is because it is an integer, so it's a number rather than text. So since this is text, it would create a problem. So, you could just pause the video or whatever to copy this down. So again, you have to do score object first, because if you just did get component without doing score object, the script would think you're trying to change what this script is attached to. Well, this script is attached to the camera. You're not trying to change the camera. You're trying to change the score object. So score object.getComponent textmesh.text, and then whatever verbiage you want. It doesn't have to be score. It can be whatever, player 1 score. And then, if you want to just review that here in the inspector, there's the text mesh component, and then there is the text attribute that we're changing. Okay, so that's how you do scoring. We'll quickly run this. You'll see the other stuff happening too. But, so if we start dropping bombs, there you go. You see that the score is increasing. My aim is terrible, but the score is increasing. Okay, so again, quick summary. GameFlow, you're creating a variable that's public. That is static. My apologies. It's public, but it's static. You're creating an object to make the camera aware of the text object. And then you're just bringing the text object to the forefront, and then you are making that text object equal to that new variable you just created. So, that was the first thing that I said I was going to show you. The other thing, background. This is very similar to foreground, okay? Now, because it's in the background, you want it to move slower, so that's the only change we have to make. Right now, the foreground isn't actually moving. The camera is moving. The foreground is static. So, if we want this to move slower than this, then what we actually have to do, we have to have our background moving ever so slightly to the right. But because it's moving slower than the camera is, it doesn't look like it's moving to the right. So if you watch it in the background, you see it's moving to the left, but it's moving slower than the foreground. And that's because we have, which I'm about to show you, a script that tells us to move ever so slightly to the right. So we have our background selected. And by the way, I just used the same image as the foreground. I just scaled it out. So it says like scale to, and I changed the color. So like this is like a bright green. It's just a matter of clicking on color and adding something to it. I added a little bit of gray. And again, changing color is something we already discussed. So let's look at that background scrolling. So to do that, Our object needs to have the rigid body, because as we said, if we want it to move, it needs a rigid body 2D, and then no gravity. We don't want it dropping down. And then let's open up that script. So here we are adding a positive velocity along the x-axis, but this again is smaller than what the camera is moving at, because if you recall, the camera right now is moving at a base speed of 2. This is moving at 1.2. So in other words, there's a difference of 0.8. So that is the effective speed you're seeing this move at 0.8. So this is actually moving to the right, but you can't tell because the camera is moving faster than it. Okay, so, and you need the background to stop moving just like you need the foreground. So in the foreground, we said once the camera got to a certain position, stop. Same thing. If the camera's reached a certain position, we need to have this stop moving. Now, so that's score, that's background. What about some of these other things? The helicopter. Just like the boss. So it has a sprite renderer with an image that was drawn externally. It has a polygon collider. That's a trigger. It has a rigid body so we can move it with 0 gravity, and has a script attached to it. So for the Helio script, what we did is when this starts, we give it its velocity. So it's moving -1. So it's moving along the x-axis, but we're adding an additional -1, which means unlike this, which is meant to be moving slower, this is meant to be moving faster. And that's why if you notice, it's moving faster than the background. It's passing over it. So pretty easy to create some of these illusions. So again, background is actually moving forward, but it's moving forward slower than the camera is moving. This, on the other hand, is moving in the same, or should I say, it's moving against the camera, and it's moving -1, so it's moving in the opposite direction. And that's about it, I think. Well, a couple minor things. You notice that this now has thrust, so that is just a particle system. So that is just game object, effect, particle system, and then you make it look the way that you want. I really can't go through a particle system for a tutorial like this. Particle system alone is like hours. But if you want to like pause the video, you can see a few things that I did. As far as the start lifetime is very short because you don't want this traveling very far, so it's only 0.3 of a second. Start speed is down all the way to 1.2 because you don't want it moving too fast. Again, that's purely it's purely subjective, however you want the thrust to look. A few other things, emission, I increased the emission because it defaults to like 10. Shape, I tweaked the angle, so there's like a cone shape that I chose. It defaults like a 25-degree angle. By making it 15 or 17 rather, it makes this much more narrow. Again, purely arbitrary, whatever you think looks right. Color over lifetime, it goes from like a darker blue to a lighter blue. It's really not evident because it's so small, you might not even bother doing that. And the other thing that I did is at the top here, so the bottom is changing color, the top is changing translucence, so it becomes more translucent. So it does that way the particles don't just disappear, the particles are actually fading. And that's about it. Nothing else really special. Size over lifetime changes over time, but again, it's not really worth doing because the particles are so small. But if you choose to, that just so you know, that's out there. As far as the new guns, Basically, again, this just repurposes technology that we've already used, functionality that we've already used. So it's just an image drawn in an external paint program, has a polygon collider so that way we can detect collisions with the ship or the ship's shots or the bombs, and it has its own script. So if we open up that script, basically we've already seen this kind of functionality. So this is looking to see the position of your ship in relationship to the position of the turret, and once you get close enough, it starts the routine of firing, which is here, because we already did that. Remember, we did that with the mothership. So with the mothership, that once you get to a certain distance, it starts shooting at you. The only thing this isn't is this isn't auto-recursive. So in other words, it doesn't keep repeating itself. So it shoots just once, but if you want it to repeat itself, you just put the start coroutine in here. So once it runs, the start routine says, okay, do it again. And again, this is all functionality that we already covered. And I think that's about it. So I think I'm going to end this here. Like I said, this is a really kind of a different video for me because I usually walk you guys through every step. But I noticed there really weren't many views for this series, and so I don't want to beleaguer it. But I did want to keep my promise to show you how to do the scoring, as well as a few of these extra things. So I think that should about do it. If you have any questions, leave a comment, and I'll look to see if there's more that I can do. But I think that pretty much wraps this up because even this has more functionality than I believe the original Scramble did, because the Scramble basically just had the tanks and the missiles. I don't think there was any other kind of ship shooting, and I don't think there was any airborne planes. I think there were like UFOs that just kind of bobbed up and down. And certainly Scramble, to the best of my knowledge, did not have any bosses. So we've already gone beyond what the original arcade game could do. So I hope that you found this useful. I hope that you found it helpful, and please enjoy the rest of your day.